At sunrise, Rome did not wake all at once. It breathed, it groaned. It smelled of smoke, wet stone, olives, sweat, and the river. The streets near the Forum rattled with carts and shouted prices. In the quiet courtyards, behind thick walls, orders moved like wind you could not see, only feel. A lamp hissed, a door hinge squealed, a key turned, a footstep halted. Inside one of those houses, a large domus with a red-tiled roof and a painted garden. The day began the way it always did, with hands that did not belong to the house. They belonged to slaves. They were the hands that lit the brazier before the sky was pink, the hands that swept the mosaic floors before anyone tracked dust across the dolphins and vines, the hands that carried water till the rims of clay jars bit into the flesh, the hands that knew where the master's sandals were without looking, the hands that forgot their own names and remembered everyone else's. History remembers the grand things, triumphs, laws, emperors, the crack of a whip and the shadow of a cross against a hill. It tells us a lot about crucifixion, how it stood like a brutal warning on roads into cities, how bodies hung there for hours, sometimes days, how the pain was slow, the breath small, the end shameful. But the people who lived under Rome's heel, the ones who bled into its stones and built its arches, they knew a darker truth. They carried it in silence, because silence kept them alive. The truth was simple and hard like granite. Crucifixion was not the worst punishment in ancient Rome. This idea can feel strange, because the cross is a symbol that never left us. We think of the nails, we think of the hunger, we think of the crowd, we think of the word final. But in the world of Roman slavery, final could be a mercy. There were punishments that did not end quickly. There were punishments that did not even look like punishments, not at first. They looked like work. They looked like routine. They looked like a door that closed and never opened again. To understand that world, you must walk through it slowly. Start with the collar. A slave collar in Rome could be a ring of iron locked around the neck. Sometimes it had a small metal tag that spoke in cold words, "I am a slave, hold me so I do not flee, return me to my master." The Latin could be simple, the meaning was not. The collar told a story every hour of the day. You belong to someone, you can be taken, borrowed, lent, punished. You can be accused without a voice. You can be tortured to give testimony, because the law said the mouths of slaves only told truth when they were in pain. The collar was not a cross, it was not public blood, but it was heavy, and it did not come off. Now step into a place the city tried not to think about, the ergastulum. An ergastulum could be a private prison workshop hidden on an estate. Many were underground or half sunk into the earth, where light died early. Slaves slept in chains. They woke in chains. They ate in chains. The air was thick and stale. You counted seasons by the damp you felt in your bones and the coughs that never left. You learned the sound of keys, and your skin learned the language of iron. Here, punishment and work were the same, and there was no single day of pain. There were years of it. Think about the mines. Damnatio ad metallo, condemnation to the mines, sounds like a sentence on a tablet, something dry and neat. In truth, it was a slow death. The tunnels were narrow, the air was poisoned with dust, torches ate the oxygen, hammers beat rock till the joints burned. Men and women, sometimes children, scraped at stone veins and coughed black. Eyes stung, nails split. A drop of water from the ceiling became a friend. A bit of sun at the entrance became a myth. In some mines, chains were fixed to ankles, so you could shuffle but not run. If a tunnel fell, the mountain fell on your name. If you lived, your lungs hardened like old leather. The mine did not need a cross. It had time. It had darkness. It had the patient cruelty of the earth, pressed into use by the state. Moved to the quarry. Stone for Rome's temples and baths did not lift itself. Teams in quarries cut blocks in heat that bounced off bright rock like fire. The sun baked the skin, the dust lodged in the throat. The rope burned palms slick with sweat. A block could crush a man flat, and no one would write a law poem about it. A slave might be beaten not because he was evil, but because stone must move and the overseer must show power. A day like that did not end with one death on a hill. It ended with every muscle drained, every small hope spent, and then borrowed again for tomorrow. Look at the mills. Grain was life. Grinding grain meant food, money, and rhythm. Big commercial mills used donkeys to turn heavy stones, but sometimes the donkeys were people. Men, women, and children pushed until the world was a circle. Shoulders tore, knees gave way, the dust made a paste in the nose. A person could spend years walking and not go anywhere. No cross stood at the door, just a wheel and a wall and a keeper with a stick. Glance at the arena too. We know the word for it, damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. It sounds like a spectacular death, a public drama, and that is how the crowd used it. But the terror began long before the gate opened. It began in the holding cells, under the seats where the crowd cheered. It began when you heard a lion cough or a bear paw at wood. It began when you realized the city had laws to control how often a private owner could send a slave to the beasts, because even Rome sometimes hid from its own appetite. The arena was a machine for death and a mirror for the city. To go there was to become a story that fed a crowd. To grind in a mill or rot in a mine was to become a tool that fed a system. Which is worse? The crowd chose the show, the state often chose the long, slow drain. And then there was the house. People imagine the house as soft compared to the mines or the arena. It could be. It also could not. A house slave could be beaten for breaking a cup, for speaking at the wrong moment, for nothing at all. A girl could be used in ways we cannot dress up. A boy could be ordered to stand silent for hours until his legs shook. A cook could be beaten if the stew cooled. A porter could be marked on the forehead with letters that told the world he had tried to flee. Pain in a house wore perfume. It had rules, but the rules were written by the man who held the keys. What made all of it possible were two simple facts. First, Roman law gave masters wide power over the bodies of slaves. Second, society learned not to see. The city loved baths, games and honey cakes. It loved philosophy and poetry, but it also loved cheap labor, and cheap labor has a price someone pays in a place you do not visit. Now meet one person in this world. A person without a famous name, because most of them had none that survived. Let us call him the man in the collar, because that is how others would have known him. He was not born in the house where he now worked. He spoke the language of Rome with a rough edge that betrayed a different childhood. Maybe he was captured in a war far away. Maybe he was sold by a debt, or by a raid, or by a ship. The details for him were not written down. What mattered was here and now. The sandals he carried, the orders he memorized, the corners of the courtyard he cleaned in circles so even the ants ran in clean paths. He had learned the map of danger in the domus. He knew the master's moods by the way the man breathed when he sat up in bed. He knew the mistress's anger by the speed of her bracelets. He knew the steward's eyes, which were empty like dry wells. He learned how to become air. He learned when to be seen and when to vanish. He learned to listen to footsteps and sort them into safe, unsafe, and unknown. He had a small scar behind his right ear from a blow that knocked him into a wall when he first arrived and failed to kneel fast enough. He had learned the rules since then, and the rules had learned him. In this house there was also a boy who had been born into slavery. The boy's world was smaller than the man's. He thought Rome was the width of the street he swept and the height of the sky above the roof. He had never seen a hill of crosses. He had seen a collar put on, and that was enough. One morning, the steward came down to the storage room where oil jars slept on their sides. He brought the smell of wine and the quickness of a man who enjoyed owning time. He told the man in the collar that a silver spoon was missing. The master's guests would dine that evening, and the spoon mattered more than many lives. The man did not have the spoon. He said so in a quiet tone that was careful not to sound like a tone at all. The steward nodded the way a cat might nod to a mouse. "The master will find the truth," he said. In Rome, the law said the testimony of slaves counted only under torture. It was a belief dressed as logic. Pain squeezes lies out of a person like juice from a grape. So when objects went missing or rumors curled through a house like smoke, the answer was not a search, it was a roam. It was a rope, it was a stick, it was heat. It was the idea that a body will always tell the truth if you hurt it long enough. The man in the collar felt something inside him become small and cold. Not because he had never been beaten, he had. He was afraid because he knew the other kinds of punishment, the ones that lasted longer than bruises. He had seen a servant sent to the country estate and placed in the underground. He had watched a kitchen slave disappear into a mine after a guest's ring went missing. He had heard of a woman taken from the laundry and sold to a mill to walk in circles until she forgot her own face. He knew that the cross was allowed in. These other things were quiet. They swallowed you whole, and no one in the city had to look. The steward took the man to the small inner court where tools hung on a wall. There was a whip there were thongs, there was a stick that had been smoothed by years of use, but there was also a leash of iron links. "Confess," the steward said, as if the word had one meaning. The man did not speak. He tried to make himself into air again. Air cannot be hurt, but the body is not air. The steward nodded to two assistants. One held the man's arms back, the other wrapped the iron around his wrists. The metal bit like teeth. The steward asked again. The man said he did not take the spoon. Pain came. It was not a surprise. The surprise was how calm he felt as it happened, as if he were outside himself and watching. He watched the stick move. He watched his own breath move, too, in short, hard bursts, like a hunted animal. He watched a little blood. He watched the ground. The pain was not the thing that scared him most. What scared him was the future. He saw it like a hallway with no door at the end. He thought of the ergastulum, how the door to the sun is small and far. He thought of the mines, how night is a mouth. He thought of the mill, how a circle can be a prison. He thought, against his will, of the arena, how the city laughs and cries and goes home to dinner. He thought of a cross, and for a moment felt something like shame for the thought that crossed his mind. He thought, "At least that ends." The steward grew bored. Pain, like any tool, loses its shine if you use it too often. He told the assistants to take the man to a side room and lock him there until evening. "We will see," he said, which was how men like him said, "I will decide." He wiped his hands on a cloth, as if truth were oil and could be rubbed off. In the side room there was a bench and a bucket, and a tiny square of light at the top where bricks didn't meet tight. The man sat. He listened. He could hear the house above him, laughter in one room, argument in another, a dog clawing at wood, the slow music of water being poured. He could hear the small boy outside, sweeping dust in a circle that would return. He felt his wrists throb. He felt his back burn. He felt his breath settle. He placed his mind in a place he had learned to build inside himself, a plain room with strong walls. In that room he could line up his memories like jars and decide which ones to look at. He chose an old one, a hill he had climbed as a child, high enough to look down on a river that turned silver in the sun. He had not known it then, but that day was the last day his life belonged to him. He held the memory gently, like something made of glass. When the door opened again, the steward stood there with a new face, one that pretended to be kind. He said the spoon had still not appeared. He said the master was angry. He said there were choices. He said things in the tone of a man who enjoys the way each word lands. He said, "You could tell me a name, you could tell me a plan, or you could be sent away." The man knew what away meant. Away could mean a sail to a quarry. Away could mean a mine. Away could mean the underground on the country estate, where men slept in a row and forgot the stars. Away almost never meant across. He thought of the boy with the broom. He thought of the cook who once pressed a little food into his hand when he was new and lost and shaking. He thought of the porter who had a scar like a river down his jaw and a quiet way of saying, "Be careful." He thought of the woman in the laundry who sang under her breath so softly that the steam swallowed her song. He did not speak. The steward smiled without warmth. He told the assistants to chain the man to a ring in the floor. He said, "We have time," then he left. The man lowered himself to the ground. The iron was heavy. It sang a low song when it moved. He looked at the square of light. It was dull now, like a dead coin. He listened. The house breathed above him. He closed his eyes and pictured the inside of the mine he had never seen, the way he imagined it must be. Tight walls, dust like fog, the sound of a hammer in a heartbeat rhythm, the way a cough shakes you from the ribs to the teeth. He pictured the mill, the long push, the wheel that would never praise you. He pictured the underground cellars of the country estate where rumour said the sun was only a memory people traded like a story. He thought, which fate will they choose for me? And then a new sound came from the corridor, not the steward's steps, not the assistant's boots. It was smaller, bare feet, fast, a whisper at the door, a breath on the other side of the wood, and a thread of a voice that belonged to the boy with the broom. "They found the spoon," the boy whispered. "It fell under the table, but the steward told the master a different thing. He told him you were dangerous." The man's heart did not leap. It went very still. Dangerous. That word could be a sentence by itself. In Rome, a dangerous slave could be marked, could be chained for life, could be sent away so the house would feel safe again. The truth about the spoon would not matter if a man like the steward needed it to not matter. "Run," the boy breathed, like a prayer that had lost its God. "Please, run." Run to where? The city knew how to catch bodies. Runaway slaves wore their fear like a smell. Walls have eyes where coin shines. Collars have words. And yet people ran. They hid in alleys. They begged old gods. They cut iron. They chose the open world with all of its teeth over the closed one, with its long, slow bite. The man listened to the boy's small breath. He listened to his own. He felt the chain on his wrists and thought of choices that were not choices. He had learned to be air. He had learned to be stone. Now, for the first time in years, he wondered if he could be wind. A thing that moves and cannot be held. Above them, somewhere in the painted rooms, the steward was speaking to the master. Perhaps he was saying that order must be kept. Perhaps he was smiling. Perhaps he was offering a solution that sounded smooth and wise. Send the man to the country ergastulum for a season, or to the quarry for a while, so he will remember his place. Words like that slide easily, but they land like chains. In the dark, the man made a small decision. Not about running, not yet. He decided this. He would not confess to a thing he did not do, even if it cost him the thin grey life he knew. It was a piece of himself he could hold without iron taking it. He would carry that peace into whatever came next. A footstep sounded in the corridor, this time heavier, measured, practiced. The boy's breath vanished like a candle blown out. A key turned. We think we know what fear is when we imagine a cross on a hill. We think the worst thing death can be is slow and public, but the Roman world taught another lesson. There are punishments that are not meant to kill you fast. They are meant to make your life into a punishment every day. The mine, the mill, the underground cell, the brand on the forehead, the law that says your body's truth only counts when you scream, the chain that is part of your skin, the quiet places where hope has to whisper. The door opened. Shadow filled the frame, and the voice that spoke did not say what the man expected. It said, almost gently, "The Master has decided." Decided what? The cross? No, something else. Something that could last years and eat a man from the edges inward. What choice had been made and why would decide whether the man kept his name inside his head or whether even that would be ground down into dust. The decision came like a stone dropped into a well. No one saw the bottom, but everyone heard the sound. "The Master has decided," the steward said, standing tall in the doorway of the little room. "You will be sent to the country estate for correction." He said the last word as if it were a warm blanket. It was not. In Rome, correction could be a season, a year, or the rest of your life. It could be a place underground where day never really arrived. It could be a wheel that turned and turned while your hope grew thin like thread. The man in the collar did not argue. He knew that words could be used against you once they were spoken. He stood. The chain sang. The steward nodded to the assistants, who tied the man's wrists. He was led through the house he had cleaned, past the corridor where lamps their hands had polished now burned like little suns, past the painted garden where a fountain whispered. Slaves stepped aside without looking. To look was dangerous. To feel was dangerous. Silence kept you whole. At the front, a litter waited for the master and a cart waited for the man. He climbed into the back of the cart with help that was not kind. 2 other men sat there already, both in collars, both with faces like walls. One had a brand on his forehead, letters burned into flesh to tell the world he had tried to run. The other had a scar where a chain had rubbed him raw, then healed, then rubbed again. The cart rolled. The city watched without watching. Market sellers shouted. A baker's boy ran with a tray of bread, eyes bright and empty of you. A dog sniffed and moved on. At a corner, a wood post carried a notice for a lost slave with a reward. It described a face and a limp and a mark on the shoulder. The city loved signs. They kept order. They kept fear where it belonged. They passed a place where the law kept its tools, tall frames for whipping, posts for tying, rooms where questions were asked under pain. The city called this seeking the truth. The man thought of the spoon lying under a table, and the truth the steward had chosen instead. He did not let anger bloom. Anger inside a cage can set you on fire from within. The walls of Rome fell behind them. The road became a ribbon of dust. The sun climbed. Fields spread out like green cloths. Villas appeared with red roofs and tall cypresses like spears guarding a door. The cart stopped at one of these places, large, rich, busy. This was the country estate. A man waited by the gate. He was not dressed like a master. He was not dressed like a slave. He was the thing in between. A man whose power came from someone else's power. He was the estate steward, the villicus. His eyes were sharp and dry, like stones that have never known moss. Beside him stood a heavier man with a ring of keys and arms like ropes, the Augustularius, keeper of the underground. Papers changed hands. A small mark was made with ink. The man felt a strange thing, a tug in his chest, when he realized that the decision about his life was now a stroke of a reed on wax. The ergastularius looked them over, the way a farmer looks at animals he is about to put to work. "Underground," he said. They were taken past barns, past granaries, past the courtyard where women trod grapes and laughed in a tired way, past a shed where the millstones waited for bodies to push them. Then a door opened in the ground. The air changed. It went from warm and full to heavy and close. The steps down were worn smooth by many feet. The light fell away. The ergastulum was a long stone room with low arches. It was not exactly dark. Oil lamps hung in a row. Their flames were small, and the smoke wrote slow grey words in the air that no one could read. Along the walls ran wooden frames where men could be chained, each with a ring and a short iron length to hold a wrist. In the centre stood posts and tools. A bucket sat in a corner with a smell that made the head swim. Chains spoke softly, the way leaves speak in wind. Men moved with the gait of people who have learned to make every step count. Some faces were pitted with old blows, some had grown thin in a way that made the bones look like thoughts that would not go away. Some were young, some were old, in the way work makes you old. The keeper unhooked a chain, clicked a cuff around the man's right wrist, and slid the iron through the ring in the frame. The weight was not heavy, the meaning was. He tested the length, smiled without joy, and moved on. A bell rang. Work time. The rhythm of the ergastulum was not written on a tablet. It was written in backs and wrists and the long day. A horn sounded before dawn. You stood, you were counted, you were led up to light, you were pointed at work, cutting wood, digging ditches, moving stones, dragging timber, turning the mill when the animals flagged, carrying water to the vineyard, hauling baskets until the ropes ate your skin. At midday you ate a bowl of something that pretended to be food, then you went on. In the evening you were counted again and led back down. There were rules. Talk little. Look down. Move when told. Do not fall. Do not answer back. Do not break tools. Do not hide. Do not share food without a glance at the keeper first. Do not sing where it can be heard. If a thing breaks, show the pieces and your empty hands. There were other rules that no one said. Find shade when you can. Count steps to make the day a number you can hold. Keep one memory whole so you remember you have a mind. Watch the guard's face for weather. If someone drops, 2 hands to lift are safer than 1. Trade small kindness like coins. A sip of water, a shared rag, a look that says you are seen without words. On the first morning, the man in the collar was set to the mill. The stone was taller than his chest and heavy like time. A beam stuck out from it like an arm. He and another man leaned their shoulders into the beam, and the world became a circle. The stone growled. Grain whispered. Dust rose like a soft brown ghost and settled on nose and tongue and skin until everything tasted the same. Around and around, foot by foot. The beam pushed back like a beast that did not grow tired. The other man at the beam was the one with the branded forehead. His mouth was a straight line. His eyes were not. At first they did not speak. Breath belonged to the wheel. Later, when the keeper looked away, the branded man said a single quiet word. "New." The man in the collar dipped his chin. "House?" the other asked. He nodded again. The branded man nodded back in the slow way of people who have had many nods and few words. He pushed. The stone pushed back. The beam creaked. The dust settled on their lashes like snow that did not melt. "Name?" the branded man asked after a time. The man in the collar did not answer. He did not know if telling a name in a place like this made it stronger or weaker. He had kept it in his head for years, like a candle in a jar. Saying it now felt like opening the jar in wind. The branded man did not press. He understood. In the ergastulum, you learnt the difference between questions that were doors and questions that were knives. At night, chained to the wood frame, the man learned the second part of correction. Sleep did not come soft. Chains make you one thing with the wall, shoulders burn, hips ache, ankles swell. The mind refuses to lie down. It keeps walking the beam, walking the ditch, walking the vineyard path through dust where no path exists. Lamps spit, men cough. A rat's small feet sound like someone stitching with a needle. The keeper walks the line and rattles keys the way a child rattles a toy. Every sound has edges. 1 week turned into 2, the way a rope turns into a coil. Time wrapped around itself. On some days the man went to the ditches, digging a straight trench so water would obey. On others he hauled baskets of wet clay to a pit where men packed it into bricks. Once he helped push a cart full of stones. The cart wheel had a voice like a wound. On the worst day he was sent to the timber pond, rolling logs with a stick while cold water chewed his feet until they went numb and then burned as if lit. Pain was not new. The new thing was the way it stayed. It became part of the day like the horn and the ladle and the ring in the wall. It did not spike. It did not end. It just stayed. There were punishments inside the punishment. If you fell, 10 blows. If you hid, 20. If you spoke back, the stick until you bled. If you tried to run, the yoke. The yoke was a wooden frame tied across your shoulders with arms out, hands lashed to ends like a cross you carried. It did not kill you, it made the world heavy. The branded man carried the yoke for 3 days once. He did not cry. He did not moan. He simply learned to turn sideways at doors. When it came off, the skin under his ribs was raw. He breathed like someone who had been held under the river and let up just before the end. There were also little mercies. A guard's wife once brought a bucket of water sweetened with a slice of fig and set it down where no one could see. A boy from the vineyard tossed a grape on the sly. A farm cat slept on a warm place in the sun and pretended that men were also animals who deserved warmth. The branded man showed the man in the collar a way to wrap a rag around a wrist so the iron rubbed less. He did not speak while he did it. He simply rapped and nodded and moved on. The man in the collar kept his mind room. He cleaned it. He placed new jars in it. The light that came at the same angle every afternoon through a grate and made a square on the floor. The sound of the millstone, not as a growl now, but as a low winter song. The sight of a vine leaf trembling when wind found it in the courtyard above. The way the branded man's mouth twitched once when a farm cat bumped his leg. He also kept a second thing, a hard little seed of anger. Not the kind that explodes and leaves you wrecked, the kind that waits. The kind that says, I am a person and I know it, even when the law says I am a tool.
On the 10th evening, something changed in the air. The keeper came down with the vilicus and a third man in a fine cloak. The cloak man did not belong to the estate. He wore a ring with a carved signet and shoes without dust. He walked past the frame slowly, looking as if he were at market inspecting olives. The ergastularius rattled keys and said names from a tablet. The branded man's name was not there. The man in the collar's number, he did not have a name on the tablet, only a number, was... The cloak man nodded when he saw the number. That one, he said. There are many buyers in Rome. Some buy people for kitchens, some buy people for fields, some buy people for mills, because animals tire and men can be made to move. And some buy for places below the ground the sun does not see. Who is he? The vilicus asked in a quiet voice that still sounded like money. An agent, the keeper grunted, from the company. The word company had a taste of metal. It meant men with contracts for mines far from Rome, men who sent iron and copper and gold and sorrow up from the earth to the city, men who bought bodies the way they bought shovels. The branded man glanced once at the man in the collar. The glance was a hand on a shoulder without touching. The keeper unlocked the ring from the wall. The iron left the man's wrist. The skin under it was white and angry. He stood, swayed once, and found his feet. The cloak man looked at his arms, his back, his legs, the way a stable master looks at a horse. "Heat will do," the cloak man said. The Villicus signed the tablet. The cloak man pressed his ring into a little pad of wax. The keeper tied the man's hands again with the smoothness of practice. "Where?" the branded man asked without moving his lips. The keeper heard anyway. He smiled in a way that said nothing human grew at the root of that smile. "South," he said, "where the earth eats men and spits them out black." The man in the collar felt his mind try to fall. He caught it and held it up. He had never seen a mine. He had imagined one in his little room of thoughts. Now imagination would meet dirt and rock and air that did not love lungs. He stood still and breathed slow. He did not beg. Begging gives the other man two things: your body and your dignity. He had little enough of the second left. He would spend it slowly. They took him upstairs to the night air. Stars were thin dust on a black tile roof. The world seemed huge and empty after the underground. The cloakman's servant brought a neck shackle and a short chain that linked to a belt. The iron clicked. The night shrank. They walked to a small wagon. Two more men were there already, both thin, both with eyes like wells. They made room. The cloakman climbed up front and took the reins. The wheels started their song. The road south did not care who rode it. It ran through fields and then through rougher country where stone showed through the skin of the land. The wagon stopped at a relay station. The men were given water. A guard counted them, then counted again. Dawn came, day burned, shadows crawled. At each stop, a scribe took a tally and put a mark next to their numbers. Paper was not flesh. It never tired. A day later, the city on the hill appeared. Not Rome, but a smaller place with a busy center and a big market. The wagon turned down a road that grew poorer as it left houses behind. Finally, it reached a palisade that smelled of sweat and smoke and old fear. Inside, a row of huts and sheds hugged the slope of a cut into the earth. Beyond them, a wide mouth opened like a cave that had learned geometry mind. The man felt the earth breathe. It did not breathe like Rome. It breathed like a thing that had swallowed many lives and learned to live with them inside. The cloakman turned them over to another keeper. Tools were issued: a hammer that was more stone than metal, a chisel, a basket for spoil. A man with a face the color of ash tied a rope around the man's waist and clipped a lantern to it. "Stay with the line," he said. "Do not wander." The mine remembers men who wander. They went in. The air changed. It went from thin and sharp to wet and tight. Water dripped from somewhere and counted time with no mercy. The light licked the walls and showed veins of dark color, lines that meant money to men who would never lift a hammer. The tunnel did not run straight. It bent and crouched and narrowed, a snake made from stone. Work began with no speech. You watched and copied. Hands that had learned a broom and a beam learned the hammer. The hammer jarred shoulder and elbow in a way that felt like being struck from inside. Chips flew and stung. Dust rose and made a thick taste. The lantern hissed and warned you that air was low. A poleman held a long pole with a rag, his job to stir the air so the lantern would live. Time in the mine was not like time in a house. It was circles of 4. Swing, breathe, chip, carry. The tunnel master rationed breath like food. Men coughed until coughing became part of the day. Once, far away, someone shouted as rock moved where it should not. A breath later, the earth sighed. The sound came like a beast lying down. Then there was silence. The line paused. A face you had barely learned might not be at the water tub later. The mine took names and turned them into echoes. Only numbers went back up to the tablet. At midday, they ate near the mouth, eyes blinking in the light. The man drank water that tasted of metal and sky, and for a moment he stood in both worlds, the light and the dark. He could have wept for the taste of wind. He did not. He met a woman there with arms like cords and a scar that ran across her scalp where hair would not grow. She carried baskets for the line and laughed without sound. She nodded at his collar. "New," she said, not as a question, but as a blessing and a warning both. He nodded back. "Do not fight the rock," she said. "Listen, it tells you where to hit." He listened that afternoon. He found a rhythm that made the hammer land not just hard, but right. The stone answered a little. The work did not grow light. It became possible. At night, they were herded into a shed with chains on the floor and rings in the wall. The breath of 50 people made a low cloud. A boy coughed in his sleep. The man lay on a mat that smelled of mold and old bodies. He closed his eyes and stood again in his mind room. He arranged 2 jars on a shelf. In one, he placed the memory of wind on his face at noon. In the other, he placed the voice of the woman. "Do not fight the rock. Listen." He added a 3rd jar he had not owned before, a new question. The cross kills, that is true, but this long, slow hollowing, what do you call it? A man can stand for a day and die as a warning to others, or he can work for a year and die piece by piece as a gift to others' wealth. Which is mercy? Which is hell? He did not answer. He let the question sit in the jar and glow. Days turned to a number. He learned the tunnel master's temper. He learned which men shared water and which men stole it with their eyes. He learned the sound of rock about to move. Once he pushed a boy away from a wall a moment before a shelf of stone came down. The boy looked at him afterward as if he had moved a mountain. The man shook his head. "No mountain moves for us," he thought. "We are the ones who move, and we move until we do not." There were punishments here too, different but the same. If you broke a tool, you worked without it. If you spoke after lights out, you learned what a stick feels like in the dark. If you slowed the line, the tunnel master tied a weight to your ankle, not heavy enough to break you, heavy enough to make you wish you would break. If you tried to run, you were shown the cage where runaways waited with collars that had spikes inward, so that even sleep hurt. The cage stood near the mouth where all could see it on the way in. Once a man did run. He made it to the scrub just beyond the palisade, and maybe he smelled the sea if the wind was right. Dogs found him at noon. He came back on a rope, breathing with blood on his calves. They did not kill him. They placed the spiked collar and set him to the pole, stirring the lantern air so others could breathe. He watched the glow all day. He did not complain. He had chosen to feel the sky one more time. He had paid. The man in the collar did not run, not yet. He collected small things. He learned where the trail out of the camp touched a ridge where a pine grew twisted in the wind. He learned the change in guard shifts when the moon was thin. He learned the name of the woman with the scar, Lysa, and the branded man's real name, given at last like a coin pressed into his hand across distance by a rumor. It was Daphnis, someone said, though the sound had been worn by many mouths and might have started as something else far away. On the 20th night, when the shed was quiet and even the rats moved softly, a whisper came like a line of smoke from the estate. It said, "For the one with the new eyes." The man turned his head. A shadow crouched by the door. It was a boy, no, older than a boy, carrying himself like a person who had learned to be small. He had the look of the house about him, cleaner skin, a way of standing that listened for orders, even when none came. "I know you," the man said, the words barely sound. It was the boy with the broom, thinner now, taller, eyes older. The boy nodded. "They sent me with a chain gang 2 days ago. I asked to be put with the carriers." "Why?" the man asked. He felt both joy and fear, large and tight. The boy swallowed. "'Cause I brought you a thing." He slipped a hand into his tunic and drew out a small metal disc on a thin strip of leather. It was not bright, but it held light like a secret. On one side, there was a crude stamp of a dolphin. On the other, a few letters scratched by a sharp nail. It was the spoon tag from the house. The missing spoon had a pair, and the pair wore the same mark. The boy had found it when he swept under the table again after the steward had lied. He had hidden it under a stone behind the kitchen. When the master sent him away for a different correction, he had taken it. He had carried it in his mouth when guards searched him. He had kept it through dust and rain to put it now into the man's hand. The man felt the small weight. It belonged to a different world. the one where proof mattered and a mark could defend a life. In this world of rock and dust, the tag was a dream, but it was also a key of another kind. I cannot save you with this, the boy whispered, but maybe it can save something inside you. Maybe one day there will be a road back to a person who listens. He paused, breath shaking. And the steward. He did more. He told the master you plotted to escape. He wrote you as dangerous on the tablet. That is why you are here. It's the word again. Dangerous. The man closed his fingers around the tag until the edge bit. The pain was clean, almost kind. Then it is true, he said, barely moving his lips. The cross is not always the worst. The worst is having a lie about you turned into years. The boy nodded once. He looked at the door. I must go. They count us at dawn. I wanted you to know you were not mad. You were not wicked. You were chosen by a lie. The man lifted his hand, chain clinking, and touched the boy's wrist, the smallest touch two human beings can make and still call it human. You did a brave thing, he said. The boy shook his head. I did a right thing. Those are not always the same, but tonight they are. He slid away like a cat. The door breathed. The night returned to its heavy self. The man lay staring into the dark that was not empty. He held the tag and felt the mind breathe under him like a beast at rest. He placed a new jar on the shelf in his mind. In it, he set a plan that was not yet a plan, only a direction, like a finger pointing toward a twisted pine on a ridge. He did not know when. He did not know how. He knew only this. A life built on a lie is a tunnel that must break somewhere, sometime, or you are no longer a man at all, but a tool that moves and stops when told. He closed his eyes and slept like a soldier in a ditch, not deep, not safe, but with purpose waiting inside the sleep like a coiled rope. At dawn, the horn blew, the line formed, the tunnel opened its mouth. The man fixed the tag under his collar with the strip of leather so it lay against his skin like a small, cold truth. He took up his hammer. He listened to the rock. Somewhere, far off, a rumor moved like wind through wheat. A collapse in a lower shaft, a protest in a yard, a foreman who pushed too hard and had to be moved. Small things. But small things start other things. The tunnel master raised his hand. The lantern hissed. The pole stirred the air. The hammer rose. And then, from the mouth of the mine, a shout came loud. Wild, wrong. For morning. The guard ran in, breath ragged. Inspection, he cried, from the capital. Inspections could mean many things. New rules, new punishments, new buyers, or a chance thin as a hair for a word to be heard by someone who was not part of the machine. The line went still. The man felt the tag warm against his skin. He looked at the tunnel master's face. He looked at the poleman's hands. He looked at the dark where the mine kept its secrets. What would an inspection bring to a place that lived on not being seen? A shout rolled through the tunnels like thunder in stone. Inspection from the capital. Work stopped. Hammers hung in the air. The poleman froze with his rag halfway through a slow circle. The lantern hissed as if it also held its breath. Inspections did not come to see people. They came to see numbers. They came to see baskets filled and carts loaded, to smell the ore and weigh the spoil and listen to overseers say, "We are on pace." But even a small crack in the machine could let a whisper pass. The tunnel master barked, "Out! Line!" Men and women set down tools. They did it carefully, the way a farmer sets down a sick child. They filed toward the mouth. The air grew clearer with each step. Light pressed on eyes, made soft by dark. Outside, the camp had changed shape. A small group stood by the palisade. One wore a short, clean cloak and a narrow face that did not bend. He held a wax tablet and a stylus like a judge holds a law. He was a procurator, one of the emperor's men, keeper of contracts, collector of dues, buyer and seller of time. With him stood two clerks, a troop officer with a red brush on his helmet, and the mine's chief keeper, who now smiled the way a dog shows teeth. The overseers pushed the line into a long row. Chains clinked. A cough tried to hide. The sun felt like an enemy with warm hands. The procurator spoke softly, and yet no sound dared cross him. "We will see the shafts," he said. "We will count the bodies. We will check the ledgers." He did not say people, he said bodies. In the language of ledgers, bodies are tools. The clerks moved fast. Shaft 2 through 31, shaft 3, 21, shaft 5, closed after fall, one read. His stylus made little cuts in wax. Each cut bit out a piece of someone's life and laid it flat. The troop officer walked down the line like a buyer at a market. He lifted a chin here, pulled back a sleeve there, looked at scars and teeth as if the mouth could tell how long the back would last. Now and then he nodded to the keeper, who made a mark on a wood tally. Men with those marks would be sent to another camp at the coast. Rumor said the pits there had air that bit like vinegar. The man in the collar watched. He kept his face calm. Inside, his mind walked his small room and touched his jars. Wind on the face. Do not fight the rock, listen. The dolphin tagged under his collar like a cold truth. He felt it press into his skin with each breath. The woman with the scar, Letza, stood 2 places down. Her eyes were steady water. The branded man, Daphnis, was not here. He was still at the estate, somewhere in light and dust, or chained to a beam in a place with no sky. The procurator looked up from the tablet. Any deaths not entered? He asked. The chief keeper's smile did not change. 2 last week, 1 at the fall, 1 at night, both entered. The procurator nodded. Any thefts? The words slid over the air like a thin knife. The keeper shook his head. None, sir. The man in the collar felt the small tag warming with the heat of his own fear. Theft. He had been sent for a spoon that was never lost by him. A lie. Had made a number on a tablet. A number had made a road that led here. The lie still lived somewhere far away, dressed in the steward's smooth voice. He felt a thought rise. Now, speak now. He did not let it out. He knew a Roman rule that lived in the roots of the law. A slave's word in a legal matter counted only if taken under pain. To get truth from a slave, they said, you must ask with iron. People in clean rooms nodded. It sounded like logic to them. It sounded like a broken world to the ones who wore collars. If he spoke here in a line with no tools at his skin, his words would be air. If he spoke in a room with ropes and sticks, his words might become a line on a wax tablet. The bitter joke was simple. To be believed, he had to be hurt. The procurator turned to go. The moment was closing like a door. Sir, said a voice. It was small and even. It came from the woman with the scar. Elisa did not lift her head. She did not challenge. She simply gave the sound of the word to the air, the way one gives a coin to a temple dish. The troop officer glared. Silence. But the procurator raised a finger. He liked order, and in order everything has a place. A voice, if controlled, could have a place. Speak, he said without interest. Lysa did not talk about food. She did not talk about beatings. Those were not things such men wanted to hear. She pointed with her chin toward the shaft with the closed mouth. The fall, she said. There are 2 still inside. The keeper's face twitched. They were crushed, he said quickly. No recovery. They were trapped, Liza said, as if she were naming the color of the sky. There is a pocket of air. We heard knocking when the tunnel went quiet. We heard it twice more in the night, then not again. We asked to dig. We were told no. The procurator looked at the keeper. His stylus paused. A pocket of air meant 2 things, delay and cost. Both were enemies to men who wrote wax by sun, not by shadow. The keeper spread his hands. The roof is loose. We would lose more men. The slope is weak. We marked it. We will open a side cut next week when the timber arrives. The troop officer shifted his weight and looked at the slope. Now he was interested. Soldiers care about ways out and ways in. Show me the mark, he said. Sve went to the fall. The ground smelled like dust and fear. The slope had slid and set like thick porridge. The keeper pointed to a stick set in a pile. Here, he said. Lysa stared at the ground where her eyes had listened at night. She listened now with her whole body. She listened for a sound that probably would not come. The man in the collar stood behind her. He thought of the jar in his mind labeled question, which is mercy, which is hell. He thought of 2 men under rock, maybe dead, maybe dying, maybe waiting. The procurator sighed, a small tired thing. Market closed for recovery. Note the delay. Send for timber now. He turned. Proceed with counts. He was not cruel, he was something harder to move, efficient. Sir, said another voice. This one was the man in the collars, and it surprised even him with how even it sounded. Not loud, not soft, clean. The troop officer spun, hand on hilt. The keeper took a step like a dog about to bite. The procurator lifted a brow. Yes? The man took one small step forward, the chain at his waist tugged. The guards did not stop him. They wanted to see him fall on his own words. He bowed his head a little, in respect that was not surrender. I have a proof, he said, about a theft. A lie sent me here. The procurator's face did not change. What proof has a slave's mouth? The man did not reach for his collar. He did not show the tag yet. He had watched law from the edge all his life in Rome. He knew the path to a mark on wax ran through a room with ropes. He said the terrible thing a person in his place must say if he wants his words to exist. You question me, he said. The clerks looked up, the troop officer smirked, the chief keeper smiled with relief. This was a familiar dance. Bring him, he said. They took him to the shed near the palisade where the camp kept its tools for truth. The room was clean, the room always is, the rope hung from a beam, the table held straps and sticks, a brazier slept in a corner. Nothing in the room hurried. Tools like these do not rush, they wait. The procurator stood by the door, a man bored at a task that must be done for the page to be complete. The troop officer leaned on a post. The chief keeper rolled his shoulders like a butcher before a cut. Name? A clerk asked. Number, the keeper corrected and gave it. Statement, the procurator said, with a little sigh. The man in the collar looked at the rope. It looked back at him with no hate. It had no mind. The hate lived in the idea behind it, pain as a key that opens a mouth. He reached slowly under his collar, brought out the small tag on its leather strip and held it up. The dolphin stamp caught the light, small and stubborn. This, mark, he said. It matches a spoon in a house in the city. That spoon was said to be stolen by me. The tag was found under the dining table. Someone hid it after it fell. The steward lied. He called me dangerous. He wrote me into this place. The procurator did not move closer. He did not need to. His eyes were measured tools. Who saw the finding? A boy, the man said. He is here now. He was sent with a chain gang. He kept the tag and brought it. The troop officer laughed once, a short bark. A boy's word and a slave's word, two shadows trying to be a wall. The clerk wrote, claims false theft, produces house tag, alleges steward false report. The procurator looked at the keeper. This is a mine, he said, as if reminding himself where they stood. We do not judge city matters. We note them and forward. The man in the collar let himself breathe once. Forward was better than nowhere. The keeper, eager to finish, gestured. We will record under question. He nodded to the rope. Wait, the procurator said, not because he doubted the rope, but because he liked neatness. Where is the boy? A guard fetched him. The boy stepped in, a narrow shape with eyes too old for his face. He looked at the man in the collar, then at the tools, and he became even smaller, as if trying to fold into a seam in the wall. The procurator asked, You brought this tag? Yes, the boy said. His voice did not shake. It was thin wire. I found it when I swept again. I hid it. I brought it. Why? The troop officer asked with amusement. Men like him are always curious about a useless kind of bravery. The boy swallowed. Because the truth should shine somewhere? The clerk's stylus paused. He did not write that. There is no place on a tablet for a sentence like that. The procurator looked at the boy, and then at the rope, and then at the tag. He made a small decision that had nothing to do with mercy and everything to do with habit. He liked records that fit. Mark the object as presented, he said to the clerk. Send a copy to the city office with notice to the master's steward for reply. Hold the man for further questioning. He turned to go. We are done here. The troop officer made a soft sound of complaint. He wanted the small sport of pain. The keeper hid his frown. He wanted the lesson to be taught. But the procurator had turned away, and when a man like that turns his back, the room loses interest in blood for a moment. Back to line, the keeper said coldly. We will have our questions later. He waved the guards on. They led the man and the boy out into the bright. The mine breathed its heavy breath. Work buzzed again like a hive forced to move while smoking. The inspection flowed on. Stock, tools, numbers, faces were measured and passed like coins that had already been spent. But something had shifted. A word had broken out of the dark and reached a tablet. A tag lay now between worlds like a small bridge made of dull metal. It might hold, it might not. In Rome, many bridges lead to dead ends.
The man returned to the line. The tunnel master looked at him once, long and flat. He did not ask. He had seen what happens when people ask. The boy was sent to carry Zet at the mouth. Liza slipped back into the shaft too. Her eyes still listened. Work tried to swallow the morning, but the morning spat back. Midday, a sound came from the closed shaft. Not the cough of dust, not the clink of tools. A soft, hollow thump. Then another. 3 breaths later, one more. The earth had knocked back. Liza straightened like a bow pulled. "There," she said, but her voice did not rise. She knew who hears and who pretends deafness. The keeper pretended. "Timber tomorrow," he said. "Move!" The troop officer heard. He did not like unsolved things. He did not like men under rock while he stood above. His stomach was a soldier's stomach. It churned when order broke. "Cut a small vent," he told the tunnel master. "Now, 1 arm deep if we hear nothing close." The tunnel master did not argue with a sword in a red brush. He chose 5 with strong shoulders. He chose the man in the collar without looking at him. He handed out short picks and a long rod. "Quick," he said. "No collapse." They went to the slump where the roof had come down. The slope had settled, but did not feel safe. The ground under the feet shifted like something half awake. They set the rod at an angle and worked the pick around it, shaving shiver by shiver. Dust rose. A little run of pebbles slid and stopped. The world held. "Again," the master said. They cleared a hand-wide pipe into the fall. The rod went in to the elbow. Someone put an ear to the hole. Wind moved, a soft, hungry pull as trapped air tried to lick at life. Liza's eyes filled. She did not let water fall. "Ropes," she whispered. "We can pull small stones. We can make a breathing hole." The troop officer weighed risk and order. He lifted his hand to agree to a work that might save 2 lives and cost a day. The chief keeper hissed, "Delay!" under his breath, as if the word were a curse. But he did not say it to the officer. He said it to the air. The air did not care. They worked. The man in the collar felt the rod vibrate under his hand like a string on a lyre. He listened. He felt the weak breath from the pocket lick his skin. In that moment the mine was not a mouth, it was a lung. He pressed his ear to the hole and heard a sound that did not belong to stone. A scrape, a knock, a voice too small to be a voice, more like hope learning to speak. "We hear you," he whispered into rock. "Be still, we are here." His words went into a world of dark and stayed there a heartbeat longer than words usually stay. Then 3 taps answered, a code older than law. "I live." They cut a little more. The hole widened to 2 fists, side by side. The tunnel master stopped them there. "Enough," he said. "Timber tomorrow, no more today." The troop officer nodded. He had his order back now. "Mark the spot. Post a guard. No one touches it without me." They pulled back. The air from the hole licked their faces like the breath of a sleeping animal. The mine kept its secret for 1 more night. But now the secret had a voice that could not be called rumor. Work returned like a tide. Hammers rose. Dust fell. The day burned and then bent toward evening. The procurator finished his counts. He wrote numbers with neat strokes. He did not look at faces as he left. He had seen what he came to see. The machine still turned. The cost would be entered later, under tools repair, never under souls. At dusk, as the line came up, the chief keeper's patience, rubbed thin by the day, tore. He took the man in the collar aside with a jerk of his chin. 2 guards followed. "You spoke," he said in a voice stripped of grease. "You wasted time, you made trouble. Men like you make other men bold. Bold men break things." He signaled. The guards brought out a yoke, a heavy wooden beam with rope loops at the ends. The keeper lifted it like a craftsman lifts his chosen instrument. 3 days, he said. "So you remember your place." They laid the beam across the man's shoulders and tied his hands to the ends. The ropes bit. The wood found bone. He stood, suddenly wider than the door, as if pride had put on weight. He could not scratch his neck. He could not wipe dust from his eye. He could only stand and carry. The boy watched from the shadow by the water jars. His eyes burned, but he did not move. Lysa stood with her hands quiet, and her jaw like a line cut on a tablet. She had seen many yokes. Each one was a sentence without words. The keeper smiled at the closed shaft. "If the pocket collapses tonight," he said to no one, "we saved a day of trouble." That night the shed was a low sea of breath. The yoke did not let the man curl. It did not let him roll. It made him a shape that could not belong to sleep. He stood, then sank to a half-sit, then stood again when the ropes burned. His mind went to his room. He placed one jar on the floor and held it with both hands in his head. The jar was plain. It was made of clay that had seen fires and not broken. Inside it he put a simple vow, not to let the steward's lie be the last word about him on any tablet he could reach. If that meant pain, he would pay. Pain, in this world, bought ink. Near midnight, the ground under the shed trembled. It was small, like a big animal turning over in a dream. Men woke and held breath. The mine sighed. Then quiet came back, old and heavy. At dawn the horn blew, the line formed. The yoke made the man slower. Guards shoved him to pace. The tunnel master sent the work teams toward the shafts. He sent the breathing team to the hole. He sent the boy to carry water there. They reached the marked spot. The hole had held. No new slide lay over it. The guard stood, spear dull with long standing. He looked bored. He moved aside when the troop officer arrived. The officer nodded. "Timber," he said. Timber came, carried by 4. Ropes came, picks came. Hope, quiet and thin, came and stood near the wall, like a tired dog that still wags. The man in the collar lifted his eyes. The yoke made that small thing hard. He saw the rod, the hole, the air moving in it like the breath of a newborn thing. He felt the tag against his skin, the metal cold and stubborn as a fact. If they opened that hole, 2 men might live. If the letter from the inspection went forward, a lie might be called a lie one day. If he carried this wood for 3 days, his back might fail. If he did not, his will might. Every choice cost something. In Rome, even truth had a price tag tied to a wrist. The tunnel master raised his hand. "Now," he said, "the picks bit." And just as the first timber went in, a deep sound rolled up from the shaft below. Not a knock, not a sigh, but the groan a body makes when it cannot hold itself. The ground under their feet shifted. Pebbles began to dance. Dust rose fast, like a thrown sheet. "Hold!" the officer shouted, but the earth did not obey soldiers. The slope opened like a mouth. The man in the collar saw one thing, one tiny, crazy, simple thing, the rope coil at his feet and the yoke on his shoulders. He could not lift his arms. He could not grab. But he could fall forward with all his weight and make the yoke a lever. He could wedge the timber and the beam and his own body into a shape that might hold a breath longer.
He pitched himself down. Wood slammed, rope jumped, pain screamed, hot. The yoke bit bone, the world roared. Dust blinded.
And in that roaring dark, a hand struck his cheek from inside the hole, not a blow, but a finding. A hand alive. He heard a voice no bigger than a breath. Air. The world above him shouted. The timber groaned, the rope smoked in the groove. He felt the tag under his collar bite his skin like a small metal tooth. If he held, a life might pass through the space his pain had bought. If he slipped, all the weight would take them. What would he choose? What could he choose when the only coin he owned was his body? The earth roared like a beast, and the slope opened its mouth. The man in the collar threw himself forward, turning the yoke on his shoulders into a bar. Wood slammed, rope snapped tight. The timber wedged, dust rose like a burned sky. For a heartbeat, everything hung on his back. He felt the beam bite bone. Pain flashed white and clean. It was a knife that did not cut. It pressed and pressed, trying to turn him into something flat. The rope smoked where it rubbed, pebbles rolled and pinged, a guard swore. The troop officer shouted orders that even the earth could not hear. In the roaring dark, a hand touched his cheek from inside the opening. It was not a strike, it was a search that found. It slid along his face and found the edge of the timber. A whisper came. No, not a whisper. A breath shaped into a word. The man jammed his shoulder harder against the wood. The yoke became a lever, his body the hinge. He could not lift his arms to help. The ropes tied his hands to the ends of the beam. The very tool of his punishment became, for a few seconds, a tool to save. "Hold!" the tunnel master barked, voice raw. "Hold it steady!" Men shoved timbers in at angles. The poleman dropped his rag and used the pole like a spear to guide a brace into a gap. Lisa crawled flat on her stomach, shoulders scraping, and pushed a wedge with the kind of strength that does not come from meat, but from will. The boy ran with ropes like a wagtail at a river edge, quick, precise, afraid and unafraid. His face was brown and pockmarked, quick, precise, afraid and unafraid. The officer crouched, red brush bright with dust. "Ease," he said, and his soldier's voice found a rhythm inside the chaos. "Ease now, timber in, rope set, wait on 3. 1, 2. They shifted as a whole. The load rolled, then settled into wood. The slope shivered, then held. The roar faded to a growl. Dust turned from a storm to a fog. "Back," the tunnel master ordered. "Back, slow." They pulled the man in the collar away from the lip. The yoke scraped stone. His knees gave. He fell onto his side because his bound arms could not break the fall. The world spun. The beam lashed to his wrists, felt like the mast of a ship in a storm, and he the rope.
"Alive?" the officer asked toward the hole.
A sound came, small and stubborn. A cough dragged over stone, then a voice, flat with thirst. "Two. We are 2. Lisa closed her eyes. She had not known, if her heart could remember, how to beat for joy. It did, once. Then it went back to its work. "Give them water on cloth," the tunnel master said, all urgency and control. "Not a cup, cloth on lips only, little, little." He had seen men drown on water after long thirst. The boy soaked a rag and offered it to the hole with a hand that shook only a little. Fingers from the dark took it and pressed it to a mouth made of silence and grit. A sound came that was like thanks, spoken by the throat of a stone. "Timber walls," the master said. "Short run, brace, no more cave." He glanced at the officer. "I need the line." The officer nodded, eyes on the slope that had shown its teeth. "Take what you need. Move like men who don't want to die." They built a little road into the wound and supported it with timber ribs. They worked as if a fire was behind them and a cliff ahead. The coughing in the hole came now and then, a metronome of life. The ground hummed with old anger, but did not rise again for a time. The chief keeper stood back, face tight. He did not like this, not the saving, not the risk, not the way men and women forgot to look at their feet and began to look at each other. The jury found when work and task aren't definitely followed, but endlessly and His eyes found the man in the collar who lay on his side, gasping. The yoke still pinned his arms. When he tried to shift, the beam scraped raw. The keeper's mouth curved, a thin, hard line. "Leave the yoke," he told a guard when the guard reached to untie. 3 days was the sentence. 3 days it stayed. The guard hesitated. The officer's head turned, but only a little. He was counting timbers, counting risks, counting hours. He had no care left to count this. The guard drew his hands back. The man in the collar carried his beam and his breath. He turned his face to the earth and let the pain be what it was. Pain would not get to tell him who he was. It could only tell him what he could hold. By midday, they reached the pocket. It was smaller than fear and bigger than hope. 2 men crouched in the space like folded knives. One stared with wide, wet eyes. The other blinked slow, as if his mind had to climb up from a deep well. They were black with dust that had become another skin. Around them lay stone that had been wall an hour ago, ceiling an hour before, an enemy all morning. They brought them out one by one on a narrow plank, roped like bundles, but alive. The line went quiet in a way Rome rarely knew. No cheer, no cry, a silence of respect. The officer stood. He did not smile. Soldiers do not smile at this. He gave a short nod, the kind a man gives to a fight that does not shame him to lose. "Back to work," he said, but he said it softer. The procurator, who had returned at the shout, marked a line on wax. "Recovery," he said to the clerk. "Note delay 1 day. Note lives accounted." He did not write who had held what with his bag. The chief keeper did not write either. He watched. His dislike congealed into something like a plan. As the rescued men drank water in small sips like a prayer, the man in the collar rolled to sit. The beam wobbled on his shoulders, the ropes cut, his breath soared. The boy filled a small cup and held it for him, tilting it to his lips so the water ran past dust and into a mouth that had tasted stone all morning. "You saved them," the boy whispered. The man shook his head, slow because the beam made even that hurt. "We saved them," he said. "All of us. Even the earth, for once, did not take its chance." The boy's eyes went to the yoke. "They will not take it off." "Not yet," the man said. His voice stayed even. He had learned to make his voice a tool. Lysa stepped close. She did not touch the beam. Touch can be salt when the wound is raw. "You are a fool," she said softly, and her eyes shone in a way not made by water. "The brave kind." "Bravery is expensive," the man answered, "but sometimes the price is fair." The troop officer glanced, heard the exchange, and then let his gaze move. He could not afford to be seen caring about the man with the yoke, but a small part of him, the part that remembered mud and fear and comrades from campaigns, penned a note inside himself. It would not help much. In Rome, notes inside men do not change tablets often, but sometimes they do. The inspection ended at dusk. The procurator rode out with his clerks, numbers tidy, delays noted, orders given. The officer stayed a little longer. He walked to the camp's edge, looked at the guard posts, checked the fence for weak ties. He was a man who slept better when rope knots were right. The chief keeper watched him go and then looked at the man in the collar. He lifted his hand and waggled 2 fingers. Guards came. "To the shed," he said, voice smooth from long practice. "Lesson." They took the man to the clean room, where ropes hang and truth is found. They stood him with his back to the post. The yoke spread his arms. He could not be bound in the usual way. So the keeper bound his ankles. The brazier glowed. The irons in it were shapes that pretended to be tools. "What is the charge?" the man asked, not in challenge but in the simple way one asks the sky if it will rain.
The keeper smiled without teeth now. "You made a delay. You spoke when you were not permitted. You used your punishment to make yourself a hero where you should have been quiet."
The man looked at the post in front of his face. There were marks on it that had been made by many heads resting there while shoulders took blows. Some marks were deep, some were shallow, all were old. "The yoke is 3 days, the keeper said. "But pride needs iron." He took an iron from the brazier. It was not the big letter brand used for escape for fugitivus. It was a small round head, a kiss, some called it, a cruel name for a round burn meant to teach without maiming. He pressed it to a place just above the man's shoulder blade, where the yoke bit. The sound was meat meeting flame, a soft, wet sigh. The smell was hair and skin, turning into something you do not name. The man did not cry out. He let the pain be a sound in his head like a low drum. He counted 1, 2, 3. He thought of the rod's vibration when the trapped men knocked back. He thought of the small tag under his collar, cool now against sweat, stubborn as truth. The iron pulled away. The keeper looked almost disappointed. Men like him prefer noise. He rinsed the iron and put it back into the coals with a small care, the way a cook sets a pan straight. 3 days, he repeated, as if reciting a line from a play. Then the wheel again, and remember, no more speeches. They left him there a while, with the yoke anchoring his arms to pain. When they untied his ankles and led him back to the shed, his steps were short and stiff. The boy watched from a corner, face like a tightened rope. Liza's jaw had a line in it you could cut a tablet with. That night, as the shed breathed and men turned, the beam let the man do neither. He dozed, floated, drowned, rose. When breath burned, he stood. When his knees shook, he sank. He set a jar in his mind room and placed inside it the shape of a hand pushing a wedge. Not his hand, Liza's. He placed the soldier's nod beside it. He placed the boy's words. The truth should shine somewhere. The jar shone faintly in the mine's dark. Before dawn, footsteps came in the yard. Boots, not the keeper's usual shuffle. A guard rattled the shed door. "Up," he barked. "Count." They filed out, numbers in a book and bodies in a line. The man moved like a door on a hinge that had not seen oil. The troop officer stood there again, fresher than the night should allow, helm strap set right. 2 soldiers flanked him with spears in hand and a pack mule behind with small chests tied on. The messenger stood in the officer's shadow, a city-style cap on his head. He looked at no one. He looked at his seals. "From the procurator?" the officer said, voice carrying like metal. "Orders." "The man in the yoke," he added, eyes resting for a moment on the single beam in a sea of bent backs, "is to be brought to the office at mid-morning for formal questioning. The object presented yesterday, the tag, has been entered, and a copy sent to the urban prefect's registry. A runner has gone to the master's house. The steward is called to answer." The man in the collar did not move. He did not let hope walk out of its jar just yet. Hope is wild. It breaks things if you let it run before the gate is open. The chief keeper's face curdled. He bowed with all the wrong parts of his body. "As the order says," he said, smile hard enough to cut. The officer's eyes went to the slope. He nodded at the braced hole. "Good work," he said to the tunnel master. Then to the man with the yoke, a brief private word, not for the camp. "You bought 2 breaths. That counts." He left. The count finished. The line went to shafts. The man was kept back, set to the side like a tool someone might need soon. Lysa passed him, and under her breath, keeping her lips still, said, "Do not trust fast." Her eyes flicked toward the keeper. The boy, hauling water, gave a tiny nod and moved on. Mid-morning came like a trial of patience. The sun climbed slow, then suddenly fast. The messenger fussed with his seals, enjoying the way wax pretends to be power. The keeper kept the man waiting longer than necessary because small men love small delays. Finally, the guard cut the yoke free. The beam dropped away. Arms fell like dead branches. Blood rushed back in a hot chorus of pins and pain. The guard rubbed the rope wheels on his own wrists, as if his body were confused about who had been tied. "Walk," the keeper snapped. They walked to the office hut by the gate, a small room that smelled of oil and old ink. A wax tablet lay on the table, the procurator's neat lines dried now into small valleys. The messenger read in a drone, "Subject to be questioned regarding allegation of false theft and improper transport under dangerous slave notation. Hold pending response from city." The chief keeper sat like a man who has to taste bad wine and pretend it is good. "We will question," he said. He looked at the rope with something like longing and something like shame, both old friends. "By the law." The officer who had returned for this folded his arms. "By the law," he said flatly. "I will witness." His presence was a lid on a pot that loves to boil over. "Bring the boy," the messenger added, checking another line. "Witness to presentation." They fetched the boy. He stood with his hands clasped the way he had learned in the house, not the yard. He looked straight ahead and kept his face a place without weather. The keeper began. The rope was there to remind all that the words could be turned into pain at any moment. He spoke the questions in the old order that the city liked. "What is the object?" "A tag from a spoon," the man said. "Where found?" "Under the table." "By whom?" "By the boy."
"Why did you bring it?" the keeper asked the boy, same question as yesterday, but now written on a tablet.
"Because it was truth," the boy said, and the clerk this time wrote, "because now it had a place to live." "Who accused you?" "The steward," the man said. "Of what?" "Theft and plotting escape." "Do you confess?" "No," the man said. The officer's eyes flicked at the word. No is a heavy word when a rope is in the room. The chief keeper looked at the officer, then at the messenger's cap, then at the tablet. He ground his teeth behind his closed lips. "Mark refuses confession," he told the clerk. He wanted to say more. He didn't. The law in the officer's helmet made him careful. The messenger drew a line at the bottom of the tablet and pressed a clay seal. "Copied," he said. "Entry will be sent tonight with the post." He looked pleased. Messengers like it when things go into neat boxes. The officer nodded once. "Until we have reply, he is not to be sold or transferred." His tone made it clear that this was not a suggestion. The chief keeper smiled the smile of a man whose teeth hurt. "Of course." They led the man back to the yard. The yoke was not put on again. The law had needed a clear picture in its tidy room, and the beam ruined the lines. He stood in the sun like a tree that had been bent for a long time and now tried to remember how to stand straight. His shoulders throbbed. The burn above his blade sang its quiet, ugly song. The tag lay cool against his skin. The word dangerous lay hot across his life. That afternoon, the wind turned. It came off the hills and brought with it a taste like iron and rain that had not fallen. Men said weather words in low voices. Some spit and watched how it fell to read the sky. At the shaft, the braced hole held. The two rescued men slept in the shade like people who had gone to the border of death and wheeled back. Lysa worked with her usual calm, eyes always half toward the slope that had tried to eat friends. The boy ran water like a messenger between two worlds, the world below and the world above. Near dusk, a cart rattled in at the gate. It did not carry timber, it carried bars, collars with inward spikes, a cage frame for transport. The chief keeper's eyes brightened in the way a spider's web shines when something flies too close. "Shipment," the guard called, "from the coast." The officer's brows knit. "We do not need spikes," he said flatly. "There is no rebellion." "Simple orders from the company," the guard muttered. "New policy. After the fall at the other pit, men ran." The keeper's smile warmed like a hearth that burns the wrong things. He turned that smile toward the man in the collar and let the look say a sentence without words. "If the city delays, I will not." Night came, and with it, talk in shadows, the way Romans always had, cautious, coded, under breath. The man near the shed said there would be a transport east in 2 days to the coastal pits where salt lives in the air. Someone said the spiked collars would teach memory along the road. Someone else said a ship waited with irons already fixed to the deck so bodies could travel like cargo without walking off. The boy brought the man a crust. The man broke it and gave half back. "Keep your strength," he said. "You may need mine soon," the boy answered. The man looked at the ridge path that he had catalogued in his mind, the twisted pine, the fence gap, the drain ditch. He looked at the officer's shape near the gate, steady without sleep. He looked at the chief keeper's hut, where a little light burned as if the man counted tools before bed. He went back to his room in his head. He took down the jar with the plan that was not a plan and set it on the floor between his thoughts. "The road back to a person who listens," the boy had said. Hope poured the door softly. What he did not know, what no one in the yard yet knew, was that a second cart rolled along the road from the north under a cowl of dusk, its driver hunched, its wheels muttering. In that cart lay a sealed tablet from the city, a reply faster than such things usually came. The wax held a mark not of a steward but of a magistrate who did not like lies in household accounts because lies in small things grow into theft in public funds. The cart hit a rut, the seal jostled. The driver swore at the darkness and flicked the reins. The mule leaned into the traces, dumb and faithful. Inside the camp, the chief keeper ordered the spiked collars laid out near the gate where dawn would see them first. He did it the way a man arranges knives before carving meat. He slept better when fear had a shape. The officer walked the fence line twice, then a third time. He paused by the braced shaft. He put his hand on the timber and felt the faint creep of weight, and then the stillness after. He did not pray. Soldiers do not make bargains with the ground, but he made a promise to himself. If the reply from the city came wrong or late, he would still stand where his duty made him stand.
The man in the collar lay on his mat and watched a moth beat itself to death against a lamp. He closed his eyes and set the last jar of the day on his shelf. Inside, he placed a question that had changed shape since the mine breathed and since the inspection came. Is there a path out of the punishments that do not end, the ones that turn a life into a tool not only for me, but for those whose names no tablet keeps?
It was a large jar. It glowed dim. Far away, the mule plodded. Closer, a rat nibbled. Closest, the man's breath went in and out like a tide that has seen storms and still does not quit. At dawn, the horn would blow. The line would form. The spiked collars would shine in the new light like lies that think they are crowns. The cart would reach the gate, a seal would crack, words would choose a direction that could bend a life. Would the city's reply open a door, or would it slam another shut, pushing him toward the coast, toward collars with teeth, toward a punishment that was not death, but a life made into one long sentence? Dawn bled into the yard like thin milk. The spiked collars lay in a neat row by the gate, mean little crowns that bit inward. The horn blew, bodies formed a line. The chief keeper stood with a face that already tasted the day. The troop officer walked the fence again, counting the ways out and the ways trouble might come in. Then the cart from the north rolled up, wheels muttering, mule blowing steam in the chill. A messenger jumped down, cap straight, seals unbroken. He carried a tablet with a seal pressed deep by a ring that did not like lies. The officer broke the seal, the red thread fell, wax cracked. He read. He read again, slower, mouth tightening at one corner. "Order from the city," he said, "by the urban prefect's clerk at a magistrate's hand. Hold all transport for 2 days. No spiked collars to be issued except on an officer's written command. The steward of the city house, named in the complaint, is summoned to present himself and the inventory of that night. The man numbered here," he touched the tablet, "is to be kept for questioning on the 3rd day. In the town office, he is not to be sold or moved until then." The chief keeper smiled a knife. "And if he is dangerous?" he purred. The officer's eyes were iron. "Then he stays dangerous here, under my watch, not on your cart." A breath moved through the yard that was not quite hope and not quite fear. Men coughed, the way men cough when they pretend not to smile. The keeper's fingers twitched near the collars and then fell back to his sides. He nodded as if he agreed, but his eyes said later. Work began. Picks rose, dust climbed up the throats of the day, the braced hole held, and the saved men slept in a patch of shade that felt like a shrine someone had washed with water. The man in the collar was set to carry spoil. His arms shook, but answered. Every step sent a message up his back from the place where the iron kiss had burned him. Pain spoke. He listened, and then let it pass through him. Pain was not a king in his body. It was only a noisy guest. At noon the messenger returned. "A second order," he said. "The steward is on the road. He brings a letter from his master. The city wishes the questioning with both present." His tone made it clear he liked days like this, when papers moved men as if by strings. The officer tucked the tablet into a chest and locked it. He looked at the keeper. 2 days, he said. No transports, no spikes. One order more, not from the city but from me. Leave the man be. If he must be punished again, it will be in my view. The keeper bowed. He bowed so low, his hate almost fell out of his mouth. That night the yard was a low murmur. The rescued men drank soup like a gift and slept as if someone had pulled a curtain over a stage. Lysa sat near the shed door and whittled a bit of scrap wood with a shard of pot, making nothing, making time pass. The boy leaned his head against the post and stared at a sky that promised stars and then gave only a thin scatter of them. The man lay on his mat and held the little dolphin tag in his palm under his tunic. He felt its edge and thought of the table in the painted room, the false word, the long road, the hole in the earth where hands reached and found his face. He thought of the jar he had set in his mind. Is there a path out, not only for me, but for us who live under the punishments that do not end? The jar glowed like a coal that did not go out. Before dawn, a cart rattled in hard fast. Not the soft approach of a mule, the impatient trot of a small team driven by anger. The guard at the gate barked a challenge. The cart stopped. Sharp. A man jumped down, smooth clothes, smooth hair, smooth hands that had never known a rope burn. The steward. He had come with a letter and a look. The letter wanted the thing to be small, a mix-up, a servant's misunderstanding, a household matter not fit for state time. The look wanted the past to stay buried under new orders. The officer took the letter. He did not open it. "At the hour," he said. "We meet in town. Until then, you are a guest, and a guest does not touch my camp." The steward's mouth smiled while his eyes did not. He used the hours to count faces. He found the man in the collar without looking like he looked. He found the boy. He turned away. At mid-morning, the party set out. The officer, 2 soldiers, the messenger, the chief keeper, because he would force himself into rooms where decision lived, the steward sitting straight in his cart like a man riding a claim, the boy on foot, the man in the collar with wrists tied but head up. Lysa watched them go. She did not speak. She did not wave. She put her scrapwood in her pouch and went back to work as if the ground were listening.
The road into town threw dust at their legs. The town office was a plain room with a plain bench and a plain man behind a table. He had ink on his fingers and tired in his face. He listened for a living. He did not love drama. He loved lines that ended in a point.
The messenger read out the orders and the claim. The steward placed his letter, sealed with wax that smelled of spice. The clerk broke it, read it, and kept his face flat. The letter said many words that meant one thing. "We would like the world to stay as it was." "Question," the clerk said, and the room entered that Roman shape where hurting and truth were tied like oxen to a yoke. The officer stood with arms folded like a gate. "By the law," he said quietly. He would not stop the law. He would watch it. The chief keeper leaned on a post and let his eyes feed on the man's tied wrists. The steward smoothed his sleeve, then his face. The clerk asked the old questions because the city could not imagine new ones. "What object?" "A spoon tag." "Where found?" "Under the table." "By whom?" "The boy." "Who accused?" "The steward." "Of what?" "Theft and plotting escape." "Confess?" "No." The boy told his part. He did not tremble. He spoke like someone learning to walk a narrow beam over a drop, careful, clean, 1 foot after the other. "Eyes." The steward lifted a hand. "The boy is a child," he said with soft scorn. "He hid the tag. That is a kind of theft. He left his place. He broke trust. He is simple. He does not know what words mean." The boy looked at the floor and did not answer, because boys like him learn early that they must choose each word the way a man in a desert chooses water. The clerk made a small sign with his stylus that meant note. He looked at the officer. "The rope?" he asked. The officer's jaw worked. Then he nodded once, because that was the path the law had laid down under his feet. And he had learned in other places what happens when soldiers kick law aside. "Make it short," he said. "Make it clean. No show."
They bound the man to the questioning frame. They tied his arms, not tight enough to pull shoulder from socket, tight enough to make truth easier, the city liked to say. The clerk stood with tablet, the officer stood with eyes, the keeper stood with hunger. The steward stood with a face made of good manners wrapped around a hard seed.
"Do you confess the theft?" the clerk asked. "No," the man said. The ropes bit. His voice was steady. "I confess the truth. The tag fell. The boy found it. The steward lied." They turned the winch a little. Pain came, not the bright spear of a blow, the slow fire of a rope. The body wants to answer any question that makes the rope stop. He counted in his head as he had in the mine. 1, 2, 3. He looked at the wall and saw not wood but the face of a boy with a broom who had said, "Run," and a woman's hand pushing a wedge into rock. "Do you confess?" the clerk asked again, flat as rain. "No," he said again. He felt the rope try to pull the word out of him and turn it into a yes. He kept his mouth his own. Again, and again. The law takes small steps when it hurts. It says this is because truth is slow. The man held his slow truth. After a time, the officer lifted his hand. Enough, he said. The clerk wrote, no confession produces object, witness present. He turned to the steward. Bring the twin spoon, he said. If your table bears a set with that mark, the match will speak. The steward hesitated in a way only the city saw. Then he smiled the smile for guests and talked about distance and the dignity of a house and how such things were not carried to dusty rooms. The officer's eyes said, fetch it. The magistrate's seal on the order said the same, louder. The steward bowed with the right angle and sent a runner. They waited. Waiting in Rome is a kind of battle. People hold their breath and try not to show it. The officer stood like a wall. The keeper looked at the rope with an old lover's eyes. The clerk drew on wax the little box he drew when he did not want to look at men. The boy sat on the floor with his knees up and rested his head. The man in the collar closed his eyes and walked the shelves in his mind. He touched each jar like a friend's shoulder. He was not alone there. By afternoon, the runner returned, dusty, red-faced, clutching a wooden case. Inside lay the twin spoon, its handle stamped with a small dolphin that matched the tag's tired little fish. Metal spoke where men argued. The clerk compared. Even the steward's smoothness could not sand this edge. The marks matched. He wrote, "Object corresponds." He paused, then added a line he had not written in years, a small rebellion in neat script. Witness and complainant credible. The officer let out a breath through his nose that could have been wind. The chief keeper's mouth tightened at the corners as if he had bitten his own tongue by accident. The clerk asked the steward, "On what ground did you write dangerous?" The steward did not look at the boy. He did not look at the man. He looked at the clerk as if the question were rude. "He has a manner," he said. "He looks. He made others look. He is strong. Strong men in collars are a risk. The house must be safe." It was the truth the city liked. Fear dressed as prudence. The clerk made another note. He did not argue. In Rome, you often do not pull the weed, you mark where it grows. He closed the tablet. "Decision," he said. The room went still. The theft charge is void. The transport under dangerous notation is stayed. The man returns to the city under custody of the officer to be assigned work to the state mill while the household is audited. The steward will present accounts in 3 days. The boy remains as witness. If the steward is found in falsehood of record, the house is fine, and the steward is punished by stripes and dismissal. If not, the man remains in state work until his master claims him by proper form. The officer nodded. It was a narrow door, but it opened. The chief keeper swallowed a curse and smiled instead. "Fortunate," he said. He meant cursed. The steward bowed. His bow cracked a little. He did not look at the man. He looked at the future, already writing new lines in it. The boy looked at the man. For the first time in days his mouth turned up. It was not a child's smile. It was a soldier's small victory. They cut the ropes. The man's arms fell. Hands tingled with pins. Wrists screamed. Shoulders burned. He did not groan. He flexed his fingers and felt the world come back to them. On the road out of town, the officer walked beside him instead of in front. He did not talk of feelings. Men like him do not. He said a simple thing in a quiet tone that had the weight of a gift. "You held your word," he said. "In the mine, in the room, it mattered." The man nodded. "It bought a breath," he said.
It bought 2, the officer said, and a little law.
The city mill was not freedom. It was a wheel without end, and dust without end, and days that did not care about the name you had buried inside your head. But it was not the mine. It had a window, it had a sky beyond it. Sometimes a bird crossed the square like a drawn line, reminding you the world was bigger than your circle. The man pushed the beam with a team of men who had 100 stories and the same work. He learned their pace, he shared rags, he learned the trick of drinking before dust turned water into paste. He kept the tag near his skin, he kept his jars in order. The boy worked near the door with the sacks. He grew in the way plants grow in shade, thin, bending toward any light, stubborn. He learned numbers, he learned to write them. He became useful to a clerk. That usefulness made a little fence around him. In Rome, fences keep some blows out. 3 days later, word came down a stair like water in a pipe. The steward had been found in falsehood, not only about a spoon, but about jars of oil and a piece of jewellery that had moved itself on paper whenever tax time came. The magistrate liked tidy books. He ordered stripes on the steward's back and dismissal from the house. The master paid a fine that stung but did not humble. The house found a new steward. Houses always do. The man did not see the stripes. He heard about them the way slaves hear about weather in rooms they never enter. He did not cheer, he did not gloat. He set a new jar on the shelf in his head and put inside it a sentence. A lie was named a lie where the city could see. The jar glowed steady, not bright. The master did not come to claim him. Maybe the master felt shame and called it anger. Maybe he liked that the man's body now earned money for the state instead of for him. Maybe he forgot him. Men like him forget easily what never had a price high enough to hurt. Time did what it does. It moved. The man's back healed into a map of white lines and brown. His wrists became ropes that did not break. His breath found a way to be steady under dust. The boy's shoulders squared. Lysa's name came to the mill once in a vendor's mouth. A woman at the southern pits pulled a man clear when a cart rolled. Scar on her head, strong like rope. The man closed his eyes at that. He put the rumour into a jar and kept it safe. One autumn, the officer came through the mill yard on his way to a warehouse check. He paused when he saw the man and, breaking a small rule, stepped inside the circle of the beam while it rested. He placed something in the man's palm, a small clay token with a mark on it, the sign of a soldier's commendation, not for battle, but for service to life. "It will not buy freedom," the officer said, "but it buys the right to ask for it." The man looked at him. "From whom?" he asked. "From a city that thinks it does not owe you anything," the officer said. "Sometimes it remembers it does." Years later, 1, 2, then 3. The man took his small savings, yes, even slaves could sometimes save coins under kind clerks or by the grace of small laws, and the token, and stood in a line at a desk where men ask for things. He did not ask for much. He asked to be counted for manumission at the winter feast, when some masters freed 1 or 2 to win a cheer. He had no master there to play the crowd. He had a token and a record in a tablet, held line in mine, saved 2 lives, witnessed false account, served state. Someone in that room had a memory of a soldier's voice and a magistrate's note. Someone liked simple stories that end where they should. The clerk drew a breath and wrote a word he wrote rarely. Liber. Free. Not free as a bird. Free as a man in Rome can be when he starts with iron, a freedman, a new name, a small tax, a city that still looks down on you with a smile that says, "We remember your collar," but free. He left the mill that day, walking like a man who had learned to carry weight better than he carries joy. He went to the river. He stood on the bank and held the dolphin tag and the clay token together in his hand. He did not throw them in. He put them back under his tunic, where the metal could cool his skin and the clay could warm to it. He found work where free men do, carrying, cleaning, keeping watch at night for a warehouse where oil slept in tall jars. He ate better, he slept flat. He dreamed sometimes of the mine and woke with rock dust in his mouth that was not there. He walked to the edge of the city on days when wind came from the south and smelled like stone and salt. He stood on a hill and watched the road to the estates and did not hate. Hate eats the man who holds it. He had been eaten enough. One day, in a market where fish lay on wet wood and women argued about small coins as if they were gold, he saw a scar across a scalp that made hair grow in a stubborn crescent. Lysa stood under a canvas awning selling baskets. Her arms were still ropes, her eyes were the same steady water. They looked at each other and did not need to say names. Rome had not kept them, they had kept each other. They did not tell stories in the street. Rome has ears. They ate bread on a step and spoke with their eyes and a few words. She had left the pits when a contract ended and a foreman died, and a new one liked to buy animals instead of people to turn the beam. She laughed without sound and then with sound. He showed her the tag. She touched it as if it were a small animal he had saved. "And the boy?" she asked. "He writes numbers now," he said. "He carries oil and counts jars and does not cough as much." She nodded, pleased, then looked away toward the hill. "Do you think," she said, "there is a world where none of us have collars? Not on necks, not on papers, not in the way a man looks at another man and sees a tool." He followed her gaze. He thought of roads and mines and mills and rooms with ropes called truth, and walls where a mark means you cannot run even when you run. He thought of crosses on hills and the way people point to them and say, "That is the worst." He shook his head, then stopped. "I think there can be a room," he said, "inside a man that no one enters without his leave. I think there can be 2, then 5, then 10 people who keep such rooms and meet with their doors open. I think that is a start." She smiled a small, hard smile that had warmth at the center. They did not marry. Rome did not make that easy for people like them. They sat together sometimes and were quiet, and when the city was loud, their quiet was a wall. Years passed like carts, slow, then sudden, then gone. The man grew lines around his eyes that were not from pain. He grew a way of standing that said he had stood for many things and would again. When he saw the spiked collars on a carter's load, he looked away, then looked back. You should not turn away forever. The thing you refuse to see learns to hunt in the dark. He told the story sometimes, not in a square for coin, not in a bath for jokes, not to men who wanted to feel brave without paying for it. He told it to a boy who swept a floor, to a woman who brought bread to a guardhouse, to a porter who stared too long at the ground. He kept the words plain. He did not make himself a hero. He said what happened, the way a man says the weather. When he came to the sentence that had carried him like a plank on a river, "Crucifixion is not the worst," he spoke it without spice. "The worst is a life turned into a punishment that does not end," he said. "The worst is the mine that eats your breath day by day. The worst is the mill that turns you until you forget your name. The worst is the underground room where the sun is a rumor. The worst is a law that says your mouth is only true when you scream. The worst is a word like dangerous, written in a tidy hand, that sends you to a place where hope must whisper to stay alive." Sometimes the listener nodded without understanding. Sometimes their eyes filled, and they looked at their hands, as if seeing them for the first time. Sometimes they said nothing, and later he saw them stand a little straighter when someone tried to make them small. He kept walking the city. He carried sacks, he held doors, he counted jars. He did not waste pain. He spent it where it bought. A breath for someone close to falling. In Rome, that is a kind of wealth. History loves big endings. The roar of a crowd at a cross on a hill, a sword lifted, a law shouted to a forum full of men in white. But most lives in Rome did not end like that. They ended in rooms where dust hangs and lamps spit, and someone says, "Move," one last time.
What matters and what you can do something about is what happens inside the long punishments. Do you become only a tool, or do you keep a room in you clean and lit where truth can sit, even if it must sit quiet? Do you hold a tag, a token, a name, a vow? Do you spend your body like a coin to buy a breath for another, knowing you will ache for the buying? Do you speak when the door is open, even if the lie asks for pain first, so that a lie written on wax meets another line that says no?
Crucifixion was a warning Rome nailed to wood where everyone could see. The worst punishments were warnings. Rome hid in work where no one wanted to look. We live with versions of them still. The job that grinds a person into a circle, the system that counts bodies and forgets names, the rule that listens to the weak only when they hurt. So remember the man in the collar who turned his yoke into a bar that held long enough for a hand to find air. Remember the boy who brought a small truth through a long night. Remember the woman who heard a knock under stone and would not let it be called silence. Remember the soldier who kept the law from eating a man whole just because it could. None of them changed Rome. All of them changed a few breaths. That is how many worlds turn. If you want to know what made Rome strong, do not look only at its arches. Look at the backs that carried the stones. If you want to know what made Rome cruel, do not look only at its crosses. Look at the doors that closed and did not end. And if you want to know what makes a person remain a person under all that, look for the small, stubborn things. A tag with a fish on it, a clay token passed in a palm, a vow kept, a room inside the mind where a jar glows, even in the mine. This is the cost Rome hid. This is the courage it could not count. This is the truth the rope could not pull out or twist. And this is why, when we say crucifixion, we should also say mine and mill and underground and law and slow. Because sometimes death is not the worst thing a power can do to a body. Sometimes the worst is to make a life into a long dying, and to make the world call it work